This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, we are breaking Shabbat with Josh Bossé.
Ooh, this is a rough one, huh?
That feels scandalous.
Yeah, we're not supposed to do that, right?
We'll find out by the time we're talking to you.
Yeah, how do we break Sabbath? So this is something that, I mean, Brent, you've been here for the previous two conversations. This has come up in every single other episode because it is kind of the difficulty with Shabbat, especially in a modern context, especially as a little isolated person or family without a whole community social setting that supports and works with that rhythm. So yeah, we need to talk about breaking Sabbath, and specifically, we need to talk about like how we break Sabbath well.
Right, because you can't live in Sabbath forever, otherwise it doesn't have its meaning. So you have to break it somehow.
Sure.
So then the question is, how do you appropriately do that? So is that what we're getting at?
No, not like breaking Sabbath in the middle of Sabbath.
Oh, in the middle of Sabbath.
Oh, see, I wasn't prepared for that either. You're throwing me a curveball here. I like this. Okay.
So we have talked about this, though, right? Like, you know, you have your phone on, you get an email. It's an important email. Maybe it's even something you forgot that you were supposed to do Friday morning, and it just slipped your mind because you were so excited for Shabbat. And even if you're good about being like, I'm not going to respond to it, I'm not Marty, maybe you even don't clear the notification. Heaven forbid. But like, it can still get in your head. It can still be blocking you from participating fully in the Sabbath. It can pull away. And to really get into it, like, we have clear scriptural stuff that talks about breaking the Sabbath on purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the classic Jesus thing.
Yep.
You know, what's the greatest commandment? Loving your, love the Lord your God. Second greatest commandment, I should say, is it Sabbath? Is it love your neighbor? It's love your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
We know the answer to this. That means if you are in a situation where you are keeping Sabbath and you need to love your neighbor, that is more important. And that, I think, in and of itself raises a whole bunch of questions. But I want to get to that later.
Yeah. There's just like so many, like, I think often the common, I don't know, evangelical thing you always hear is how Jesus, like, he broke Sabbath all the time and he wasn't a respecter of, those kind of things. But it is a main part of the reason they say that is because there's so many stories of Jesus interacting with Sabbath and the traditions that surround it. I even think of Jesus poking at the Shammai Hillel debate about the donkey and the pit, saying, listen, even you Sabbath people know how to essentially break. Like, even Shammai is going to rescue the donkey.
Yes, yes.
Like, we wrestled with it, and it was a lot harder for you to get there, but even you get there. Like, so this idea of breaking Sabbath is maybe we'll have to talk about the other kind of breaking Sabbath in your next episode, Josh. Maybe we'll have to talk about that, like how we get out of Sabbath.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that would be great for that. But yeah, this time of like, actually, you're in a situation where for one reason or another, Sabbath is broken. And before we get into that, like we've been doing with these episodes, I want to start with a little quote from our boy Heschel. And this, I think, is one we've referenced these ideas in other quotes he had. But even if we've said this before, just like, let's let this sink in and inform what we're talking about. The seventh day is like a palace in time with a kingdom for all. It is not a date, but an atmosphere. And to me, it's that last part. We've touched on this before, Shabbat as an atmosphere. And to me, that is like, there's, in terms of breaking Shabbat, there's a wide range of, what that can look like. If in ultra-Orthodox circles, you'd be talking about like flipping on a light switch would be breaking Sabbath. In more extreme cases, like maybe you go to work on Sabbath, and like, I brought this up before. There was a time in our marriage where Sophia worked at a hospital, and it is very common. Hospitals have to be open 24/7.
Yep.
And so Sophia had to work some of those weekends. It was non-negotiable.
Yep.
Now there is, we should say this up front. There is a big principle in Judaism called B'koach Nefesh, in defense of human life. If someone needs to go to the hospital, like no one's saying like, oh, but it's Shabbat. Like it's like, nope, get him in the car, go there. Obviously, you try not to break Shabbat more than you have to. But if it's to save someone's life or if someone's health is in question in any way, modern Judaism, there are no quibbles about this. They are,
right.
On board that is the higher priority. And in fact, that's true of virtually all commands. If someone's life is at risk, all the laws go out the window, except for a few very important ones. But anyway, so within this realm of like, we have really extreme things of, literally going to work, making money on Shabbat, doing stuff that is supposed to be in the 6 days on Shabbat, all the way to like things that are pretty minor. And, that obviously fluctuates depending on how you observe Shabbat. But there's a wide variety. And so just to start on the most subtle end, like Heschel says here, Shabbat is an atmosphere. It's an environmental thing. It's something that surrounds us and is within us. And when that connection is rocked, if it's unsettled, it can kind of shatter the atmosphere. It can turn down the temperature in the room. And I think that is maybe a good place to start experientially. Like, how do we, if we're in a situation where we have to break Shabbat, how do we do it and not mess up the rest of the day? How do we see the email come through and not have that be, our fight for the rest of Shabbat, just to not think about that?
I love this idea of atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like it gives a word to, let's try this on and see if this works. I feel like sometimes there are ways to keep Shabbat that ruin the atmosphere that Heschel is referring to. Mm-hmm. I feel like it serves as a guide for how and when to break Shabbat, because there are ways to break Shabbat that preserve the atmosphere of Shabbat. Like I think about Jesus, and there are these stories where he's like, is it right to save life on Shabbat or to destroy it? Is it right to do good? And you're like, what is this? Like, I have a hard time even getting, but Heschel's comments of atmosphere somehow help me place that question of Jesus. Like, doing good, saving life is what Shabbat, what's more, like what jibes with the Shabbat atmosphere more than saving life and doing good?
Yeah.
And yet you would have me not save life. You would have me not do good. And what would kill the atmosphere of Shabbat more? I really, really like that word, atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's where, like, again, some of this is going to be a little bit of a difficult conversation to have between like us and the audience, because you out there, I don't know what your Shabbat practice looks like. I don't know what boundaries you've set up, but I can guarantee you, no matter what boundaries you set up, you will find yourself in a situation where you are like, oh shoot, I need to do that. Like for a short time, I lived with a Jewish family, and the big, like the worst case scenario was they lived in kind of a smaller house and had a couple kids. So they had multiple kids sharing the same room. And one of their kids, I think he was on the spectrum, had some like some behavioral disorder stuff. And he would get up in the middle of the night and just like turn the lights on. And they kept a pretty strict Shabbat. They didn't use electricity. Whatever was on stayed on. Whatever was off stayed off. They didn't prepare food on Shabbat. They prepared it all before. So like this was a pretty serious thing. But like you said, Marty, like being like, well, kids, sorry, lights on all night. Like that's not that's not the vibe of Shabbat. That's not the atmosphere of Shabbat.
Right.
To be like, hey, sleep while you have this bright fluorescent light beaming onto you.
Yep.
That doesn't tell the story correctly.
Right.
And I think this is where a little bit of what we talked about last week of this all being rooted in remembering, in having the stuff we fill Shabbat with be an extension and a remembrance in terms of like us making real what Shabbat is really about, that creation is good. And when we remember that in terms of like not just informationally, but by making it real, by instantiating it in this moment, that is, I think, what helps us keep track of what that atmosphere is. But again, like with the email on your phone example, or like I talked about this back in the first episode, like, Sophia and I, one of our big boundaries for Shabbat is like, we don't talk about politics. We don't talk about plans for the future, anything practical. And I think that makes sense. But, on Shabbat, sometimes we have people over and they reference something happening in politics or, whatever. They talk about what they're doing during the summer. And then they're like, oh, what are you guys planning? And then I get into being like, well, there's the baby and then we do this. And now I'm out of my Shabbat mentality. They didn't do anything wrong. Like, I didn't intentionally do anything wrong, but now I found myself here outside of Sabbath being like, uh-oh, where's, like a kid lost at the mall. Like, where's my mom? How do I get back? Now I'm just scared and everything's chaotic. And how do we, one, come back from that? And two, how do we break Shabbat intentionally and create space for that such that we might be able to come back fully into the fold of Shabbat? And so I guess I'd like to start this. Like, I know, Marty, you've kept a Sabbath practice for a long time, and we both know that there are times where, you and I, as members of Impact, have had to literally work on Shabbat. And that's been something that, like, over time I've had to, like, intentionally build in some practices and some like postures for how I carry myself on this day, so that I'm not like just, grinching on the community and being like, bah humbug. I hate that I have to sit here and listen to this. You all suck. But, also respect the spiritual practice that I'm a part of. Like, that's a tough balance. And I'm curious, just to, before I take things over too far, I'd like to hear how, like, what that's like for you, between work, between family stuff. Like, what does this bring up for you?
I mean, thankfully I was taught all of this stuff through that lens of what we've called like Jesus's yoke. Mm-hmm. I've since learned, by the way, that we need to come back to that teaching, because there's been some things that we've gotten wrong about rabbinical yokes, but I digress. Some new stuff that some of my teachers have brought up. But using that language that we've used before of the yoke of love, like loving others. Like when I knew that my Judaism and my Jewish practice and my Jewish identity was going to take up residence, at least for the foreseeable future, it was going to find itself within an evangelical, usually Gentile context, a Gentile context that is going to be aligned with just pagan rhythms, maybe secular would be a better word, secular rhythms. There is a work week. There's a Monday through Friday. There's a 9 to 5. And so the time when everybody's going to get together naturally in this Gentile world is going to be weekends. Like, we're going to show up on Friday. We're going to hang through the weekend, do Saturday, Sunday. This means that oftentimes we're going to end up doing something on Shabbat. And if I lived in an Orthodox Jewish community, the questions would be different. For me, I knew I wasn't going to. And so I was going to have to do one of two things. I was either going to become an inconvenience. I don't just mean like convenience, like, I mean, that's not the right word, maybe. I was either going to be able to come along for the ride and honor what the world I was a part of was doing, or I was going to disassociate or be kind of a stick in the mud or do something. Like, how do I best honor this call to love other people, honor other people? And for me, I just think I mean, I could have justified, like, no, this is a call, like Sabbath practice is a call for all of us. Like, I could have really defended that position, but I thought, no, I'm going to come along for the ride. I'm going to show up for the stuff. I'm going to be a part of this with no complaints. Now, if the conversation were to be like, just almost like anti-Sabbath, like no regard for that,
right,
people not even caring, like if the culture ever were to start looking that way, pointing that direction, heading that direction, my call as a Jewish resident in that world, I think, would be to go like, oh, hey, hold on. And if that needed to be a subversive practice, it could be. Mm-hmm. But I just didn't see I felt like the best thing to do in order to honor that call to love and maybe even preserve a Sabbath atmosphere that transcends an actual 26-hour period. Mm-hmm. Would be to say yes and to show up and to engage.
There was something you said earlier that I think is really crucial, at least for me, in how I approached it. Because there was part of me that's like, oh man, I'm part of this ministry organization, like spiritual practice. It's kind of our thing. Like, why can't this be different too? Why can't this whole thing be transformed? And it really is just like, yeah, I could make the case for that. And setting aside what you said, like the inconvenience part, like I think there is a deeper attitude of like setting aside our claim or our right to accommodate the other. Like there's kind of a hospitality and a setting out of good faith. Yep. And acknowledging like, hey, we do things a little bit different and we're in the minority and we could hold that, but you know what? We can take this one. Something else you said, though, that I want to, with that idea of like how you are situated in that community, I think that's where a lot of times with this question, like, there's how you normally show up in that community, right? Like maybe you're the leader, maybe you're the person behind the scenes, like making sure there's enough cups and napkins and utensils, like whatever that role is. For me, the key is that is what needs to change on Shabbat. You're still in the community, yep. But like, I don't know if you've talked about it on the podcast, the whole, Judah and Dan thing, yep. Are you the vanguard? Are you the rear guard? Yep. It's like, okay, you can shift back. You can kind of drift back into the center of the community on Shabbat. Someone else brings up politics at, your brunch, and jumping in and stopping the conversation and saying, hey, not on Shabbat. Don't talk about that on Shabbat. How dare you do that in my house, Right. And there's also participating in it fully. And then there's just kind of letting the conversation go naturally and, then just moving on. Like there's a way of just kind of letting yourself take it easy even within that communal setting. And I think that's so huge. And this actually brings me to kind of the central idea. We don't have like a text we're digging into specifically here today because the text doesn't really tell us about breaking Sabbath, or at least not positively about breaking Sabbath. So the concept I want to bring up, this is something from Jewish tradition, and it's this word shinui. Shinui. Marty, have you... Shinui. Have you ever heard of this before?
Is that the word for change? It's not the word for change, is it?
It is the word for change.
Bam! Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
I would love to just be like, look at me, but I would just have to say, look at L. Grover Fritz.
I know.
Right
I was about
there.
to say, I could see her like Force Ghost, like nodding over your shoulder.
Boom, got it.
So basically, in halakhic terms, the principle of shinui is this. If you're in a situation where, kind of practically you've got to break Shabbat, right? Like your kid flips on the light and it's 1 a.m. and you're like, I am not going to have my kids stay up all night. Shinui is basically like, hey, we have the Torah. We've built a fence around the Torah, but there's a little margin between the fence and the actual breaking Torah. So if you can cross over the fence, but like still stay close to it, if you can break rabbinic law, but not Torah law, that's preferable than breaking Torah law. So shinui is something where they're like, okay, pretend the rabbinic law doesn't exist. Well, maybe not pretend it doesn't exist, but do something in, basically the principle is to do something in a different manner, in an altered manner, usually in a way that doesn't make it simpler, but complicates it, right? So instead of just flipping the light switch on and off, you might like throw your shoe at the light switch to turn it off. Like that's not how you turn off a light switch. But by doing it in this different way, you're not doing the Torah thing of starting a fire. You're just tossing a shoe over your shoulder and look, shoot, the light went off. Like that. And that is kind of a way that the beauty of it, and this is where, there's how Shinui works in Jewish halakhic practice. I have very little to say about that, but having heard that principle is really informed how I approach this, where it's like, okay, you can be in the space, you can have, this Shabbat space kind of messed with, and you can stay in touch with it by just doing something in a strange or weird way. Like for example, one of the classic ways they do this in modern Judaism is that, like, you're not supposed to carry items in and out of a domain. So a domain could be a whole community, but you have to have a special fence that denotes its space. So if you're just if you're an observant Orthodox Jewish person living in America, you can't just like walk outside with your keys, right? Because that's an item in your pocket. But they say, well, what doesn't count as an item? Well, clothing. Of course you wear your clothing when you walk outside if you're going for a nice Shabbat walk. So they say, oh, what if I made a little like necklace, and the keys are like the pendant on the necklace, and now it's clothing, it's jewelry. So now I can carry it outside. And even though it is kind of subverting this technical rule, it's using the technicality to get around it. But I think more importantly, and back to the atmosphere, because we are intentionally breaking it, but doing it in a way that still honors the Sabbath by acknowledging, like, I'm doing this differently. Why? Because I'm dealing with some stuff that isn't really Shabbat, and I'm acknowledging that it's weird, and so I'm doing it in this funky way to still remind myself practically, why am I doing this in this weird way that doesn't make any sense? If I like back to the example of someone's life being in danger, a very observant Jew might be like, well, I need to pick up the phone to call 911. And let's say we have a very old school phone here. Maybe instead of just picking up the phone and dialing, they would like knock it off the receiver with their elbow or something, and then like dial it, but not pick it up. Like, not that picking it up would make it worse or better, but just that in doing it in a strange way, especially in a way that makes it less convenient for us, we're making sure that we're not just crossing the line for our convenience, that we are crossing the line. We're breaking Shabbat for a good reason. And because of that, we're going to do it in this weird, outlandish way.
Yeah, I feel like the Christian conversation reduces this all the time to this like simple, like, oh, I can't believe the legalism and the loopholes. And what we miss is the beauty. I remember watching a reel recently with an Orthodox Jewish family showing how they make coffee on Shabbat, something that they can't do, but they can do if they do it a particular way. And of course, I raced to the comment section to find all the Christians going like, I can't believe you think this is, whatever, doing the whole loophole thing. And yet I remember Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talking about there's two kinds of law in Judaism. One that is like, we might call it like ethical code, a law that establishes, moral order, whatever you might want to call that, justice. And then there's law that is like setting up the rules to a game. And you can't play the game unless you have and it's not an issue of like morality. It's not an issue of moral order. It's an issue of God's made a game so that you can dance with holiness.
Yes.
Like God's made a game so you can dance with the divine, and he has to give you the rules to play the game. And so what you're doing in that regard is you're playing with the rules to honor the game, and the game does its work in you. And that's what I hear you talking about in this practice of Shinui.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that analogy.
This reminds me of the first time that I remember seeing Marty break Sabbath. I think it was the 2015 Advent series, if I'm remembering the right one. But you came in to the church on a Saturday because the entire creative team was there, like making materials for the stage.
Yep.
And you walked in the door. I'm like, what are you doing here, Marty? It's Saturday.
Right.
And you're like, well, this is when the team is doing it, and I'm a part of the team, and I'm going to serve even though it's Sabbath. But then on top of that, you were wearing sweatpants, which was also weird because normally you're this weird guy walking around in tassels. I'm assuming you were wearing the tassels that day.
Probably not. Probably not. I don't wear my tassels on Shabbat, but yeah.
But I don't even remember that part. All I remember is like, I've never seen Marty in sweatpants before, but here he's, so you're here to engage, but you're doing it in this different way than how you normally do the rest of the week. So everything about it was just like communicating this, like there's intention behind what you're doing. It's weird that you're showing up. It's weird how you're dressed, but you're here to serve. It's not this like selfish thing or this, and like, you know, I mean, you can call it a loophole if you want to have a bad eye about it, but you're like, I'm here to serve this community. This is when the community is doing it. This is not a Jewish community, so they're not like adjusting their entire schedule to fit my weird practices, but I'm still a part of this community, and so I'm going to serve anyway. And that had that was almost 10 years ago now. So it had a pretty big impression on me.
Yep, totally. Yeah, that's a beautiful example.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Okay, so I think we've sketched this out, and this is a very kind of bubble gummy, squishy thing, because, you know, how much do you change something? What does this look like in other situations? Like, to some extent, we can't speak to all circumstances here, but that is, I think, as far as like a practical principle, that is the best I got in terms of how you cross that line, but still make it feel not like the other 6 days of the week. And I talked about this a little bit on one of the prior episodes, but it's like, you know, when I'm at an all staff conference at Impact that goes over the weekend and we have Saturday sessions, like I know you and I talked about this before, Marty, and you said, well, yeah, usually that's the day where they do the sessions that I'm not leading, so that, yes, I'm still there, but I'm not the one speaking and working more. And that was great for me to hear, because before that, I had the exact opposite opinion. I hated it because that's when we talked about all the budget stuff. And I'm like, this is the worst thing to think about on Shabbat. Oh, my goodness. And but the beauty of it was, first of all, once I understood how that helped you, and I'm like, oh, that means Marty's actually literally doing less work. It redeemed it like internally, and then it got me thinking about, okay, how can I be more creative in how I do this? And so it was just like, you know, like when we're at an all staff conference, one of the big things that we talk with each other and we do relational stuff. Now that's not, you know, un-Shabbat inherently, but what it did was it made me have different kinds of conversations. You know, when I would, you know, go up to a fellow minister and they'd start a conversation, instead of like talking shop, I would be like, hey, did you see this cool bird outside? Like, oh, isn't the weather great? Like I would try and talk about something more present, more in the here and now, more in what I'm feeling in this moment. Whereas, you know, if it was any other day, I might want to ask them about something they said or dig into a ministry thing. Like that is where there is so much freedom. And I think, you know, again, like as Christians and the context behind all that, we tend to think in that binary, like, well, I break it or I don't break it, and I'm going to make the righteous stand to not break it. But there is this whole squishy gray realm of like, okay, so you have to break it. You can totally invite the Spirit into that and find a way to at least make it different for yourself, so that you are wearing sweatpants to the meeting, like so that you are showing up differently. Yeah. And that's where you can also like talk to your community explicitly about that. And kind of the same thing of like, you know, if you're the one who everyone expects to show up and bring the coffee and all that, you can delegate. Maybe you still show up for the meeting, but you delegate a couple of those tasks. Like you can do lean on community. Just because you aren't going to say like, hey, community, will you rewrite your entire schedule to suit me, even though that creates 18 problems for everyone else. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask your community for anything. And in fact, I think it is important for us to, in having that conversation, like both for our own keeping of Shabbat, but also part of letting the beauty of God's Shabbat fall on other people, like for them to be included in that is also beautiful for them. You know, it's allowing them to serve you in a much deeper way than, getting coffee and napkins actually means on its own.
Absolutely.
But I want to shift to the other end of the spectrum now. So, because there's an interesting dynamic for us, because, the whole breaking Sabbath to love our neighbors, like that, I think especially with how prominent that is in Jesus's words and teachings, and how present that is, especially, in what we talk about here at Bema, but even in church in general. Like the picture painted in the parable of the Samaritan is not just like it's very it's compelling. It makes us feel like we should, it's so hugely self-sacrificial and lines up so much with everything Jesus is about, that it is like more than just like, oh, if, someone's car breaks down in front of my house, I'll go help them. There is something deeply compelling and missional about the need to love our neighbors. And here's where it gets complicated. So for a lot of people, myself included, one of the big things I do on Shabbat is I try not to look at my phone. Maybe I'll use my phone to listen to music or a podcast such as Bema Discipleship and others. Just a little plug for this podcast in case you haven't heard of it. But or maybe I'm listening to the text in us. There we go. L.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I like that.
Usually I don't, though, because I try not to, if I study and find something juicy on Shabbat, then it's just like, oh, shoot, it would be breaking Shabbat to think about this as something that could become podcast content. Uh-oh. Okay, so...
Slips into work too quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times I just have my phone off or in do not disturb mode. One of the weird practices I do that's still kind of a holdover. I used to keep very strict Sabbaths where I wouldn't use electricity, wouldn't cook, wouldn't use money. And so financial transactions are especially weird for me. And it's, I guess it's a little easier now that you could just tap to pay. It's less involved. But one of the things I do is I try to leave the house without having my phone on me, just going out with not fully equipped, only being able to go to places that I already know how to get to. That is definitely a different way of living that fits perfectly with Shabbat. But the thing is, a lot of the people that I'm close to, a lot of the people who would really fall into the love your neighbor, how are they going to get a hold of me? How am I going to know they're my neighbor? If I'm at the coffee shop, I mean, maybe I run into someone who's having it rough and needs a couple bucks. That's its own situation. Maybe God leads me to have a deeper conversation with them. Who knows? That sort of stuff can happen. But for the people who are in my community, if I have my phone on silent and, Mitch is having a crisis, and needs someone to talk to, and that's on Sabbath. If I was aware of it, I would say, well, shoot, yeah, I want to talk to you about this. That is way more important than Sabbath. We know this. Jesus tells us this. And does having my phone off, cut me off from those moments? Now, I'm not saying, have the I think there's phone settings where you can have some people's calls come through even when it's on do not disturb. I guess I bring all this up because there's the circumstantial breaking of Shabbat where it's I have to break Shabbat because I ran into something. And then there's I am compelled to break Shabbat proactively, not because something happened to me, but because I need to cross the line to go help someone else. And this is where, for me, it gets, and this is going to be a question we probably won't really answer until the next episode. But I want to hear your thoughts about that, because that missional driving, love your neighbor is really hard given the other context of, oh, we don't have a communal Shabbat, you have an individual Shabbat, and to not be as active in the world means, how does that affect our ability to love our neighbors? Man, that's something I still wrestle with, and I don't have any tidy answers, but I want to open it up.
Yeah, I do think we'll probably cycle around to some depth of that probably in our next conversation, in that next episode. It is the sticking point for that's the hardest thing for me as well. And I love all the things that you pointed, like I resonate with everything you said. I have relished using technology to my advantage, actually, for Shabbat. Like I can utilize, what do they call them on the Apple devices? Focuses now. Like I have a Sabbath focus where my phone slips into a certain set of notifications, a certain set of prescribed contacts. And it really does. I don't wear my watch on that. I have an Apple Watch. Don't wear it's not dinging all day. I purposely have it off. It's great to give my physical flesh, actually, of my wrist a break. Mm-hmm. It's good to not have the notifications going off. I will often leave my phone somewhere in a room, and I might be next to it. I might not. But there was a time where I was like, no, I have to like power down my phone. Mm-hmm. But then I literally was missing what I felt like was not that the phone was essential to Shabbat observance, but we live in a digital age, in a digital world. I was missing opportunities that I felt like Jesus would capitalize on. Mm. And so I had to learn how to, and it's often been a practice of discipline. I am going to leave that notification, which like Josh said that because he knows how I feel about notifications. Uh-huh. But when I can have a phone that has notifications that have lasted through Saturday, and I'll even try to let them go all the way into Sunday morning. Like I don't wait for sundown.
Yes.
And then sit there and answer on I do sometimes, but it's almost like this. It's just self-discipline. I'm not going to respond to those messages.
Yeah.
I'm not going to. And that almost is like this beautiful practice. The practice of Shabbat is me seeing it and saying no. Mm-hmm. And it's not shanui, but it is almost, it's this intentional awareness where I'm looking at it, square in the eyeballs and going, not today, not today, message, not today, email,
yes.
Tomorrow, but not today.
Yes.
And there's an intention to that. And but it is the sticky. It's so much easier to just follow a bunch of rules. And
yeah,
especially if you're an introvert. Boy, I could let Sabbath rules. And sometimes I do because that's life-giving. As an introvert, I need Sabbath to be but for an extrovert, they need Sabbath to connect them to people.
Oh, yes.
And Sabbath has to do that work. So it's a mess. It's a complicated, messy mess.
Yes. And that's where, I mean, ultimately the answer to all this stuff is like, well, you know, it's the spirit, man. Like I can't, you know, fine tune my phone settings so that I never miss an important call. I can't do that 6 days of the week, let alone also on the 7th. But yeah, I think that is a tension that, I mean, I think in part it's supposed to be there, and in terms of like, yeah, how we steward Sabbath, especially, and this is one of the things I think is beautiful because in Jesus's context, where there is this communally shared rhythm of Sabbath, anything deviating from that is what sticks out. And we're in the exact opposite situation where keeping Shabbat at all, it makes us, you know, the tall,
yep.
the thing that's going to get sanded down by friction.
Yep.
And so it is important. Like that's where I think our weight has to kind of be on preserving the Sabbath space and trusting the Spirit to, you know, call our attention when we need it. Because, you know, there's also, you know, Sabbath is also something that is for us and again is like rooted in enjoyment. And I think we could very easily ruin it by I'll invoke Ecclesiastes here where it says, you know, don't be too righteous or too wicked. Like, you know, don't burn yourself out being like, oh, I'm going to be a perfect Jesus follower. And, oh, it's Shabbat, but you know what? I'm going to go talk to that homeless person just to see if I can, you know, score some Jesus points. And it's like, no, that's not right. That's not the same thing. If the Spirit calls you, you better listen up. But there's a balance here. And I think to what you said before about being able to look at the thing, like there is something helpful about putting some things away and not seeing certain things, you know, in preparing for Shabbat. Like maybe put your bills like under a cloth or something. Yes. But, you know, there is always going to be some sort of knife's edge of like, well, you can see the world from where you're at, and at no matter how finely tuned it is, you're going to have to look at it and say, no, I'm going to make this day different. Even if it just means I have to, backflip to turn off a light or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Brent, you got any thoughts?
I was just thinking, like, Maggie is in that same introvert camp as Marty, and she doesn't shut people out entirely, but she also won't make plans for a Saturday.
Yes.
It's like, if something happens, if somebody pops by, if somebody from out of town wants to come visit over the weekend, like she's not gonna shut that out entirely, but she's not going to make plans if she can avoid it.
Yes, exactly the same. Yeah,
Yep.
1,000%. And yeah, sometimes things happen randomly. And also sometimes, Sophia really needs people time. And it's like, oh, goodness, it's okay for her to make plans too. And and this is the cool thing about doing this with a partner, is that then we get to kind of help each other with the Shinui thing of like, hey, what if we did this a little bit differently from how we normally do it when this friend comes over? What if we were intentional about doing this or doing that? And sometimes it's even me just her telling me like, hey, when they're over here, you can just peace out if you need to and not feel the need to host or entertain, which can be really difficult. And that is, anyway, all that stuff is really, really good and part of a healthy Shabbat. Like, again, this is not something like break glass in case of emergency. This is stuff that's going to happen pretty regularly. Like, it comes up. And I think it's really important to think about this stuff ahead of time, because if you're just trying to build a Sabbath practice or maintain a Sabbath practice or improve your Sabbath practice, and you run into a situation where you have to break it. Like I work with college students, and so I can't imagine how many times in the middle of their Shabbat they've been like, oh shoot, I have a paper due tomorrow. Like I can't not do that paper. My grade is like, and that is a reality. And that actually brings me to the very last thing I want to talk about, which is a little invention of my own. So,
well, Josh, can I just point out how helpful your thought was of using Shinui for other people's?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you made this passing comment, and I thought, what a life-giving thing when you see somebody struggling with, and it could be Sabbath, it could be other things too, but we're talking about Sabbath. And you're like, hey, can I actually help you actually observe? Can I help you find a unique way to honor the thing you're trying to honor and still help you do what you need to do? Like, one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced when I'm fasting or when I'm practicing Shabbat is all these people that fly into my life and they're like, you're not supposed to be doing that, are you? Like, nothing is more like conscience searing, insecurity inducing than this weird out of hand judgment from somebody that's obviously not, they're not joining me in this observance. They're just like from the outside critiquing, versus like life-giving. That was a beautiful statement that you made of how can I help you fulfill your heart's desire to honor and commit to this thing and still do the thing that you really do need to do right now. That's the kind of coming alongside of. Oh. That is so beautiful. That's the atmosphere of Shabbat.
There we go. Thank you for calling that out. The last thought I have, the last big thought, I don't know if this will stir up conversation or not, but for the times where you do just have some catastrophe, a pipe in your house bursts, you realize you've got a paper due, and, you've got to use your Shabbat doing that. That stuff has happened to us, especially with all the medical stuff. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's just like someone dies or you had a hard conversation and just all Shabbat, there has been no release from that. That has happened on occasion to me and Sophia. And so if we are ever at the end of Shabbat and we are still just like, I'm so tired, I'm not ready to go back to the world, I don't even know what today has been. The practice that I like to do is to just say, you know what? Something happened to this Shabbat and it died a little bit. And so we need to resurrect it. and then we just add a Shabbat on Sunday, resurrection Shabbat on Sunday, or, a couple hours, or a practice, or like we were talking about last episode, like a ritual, something to give us that respite. Because Shabbat, it is like, we talk about a lot on this podcast about spiritual practices and making space and all that. And, there is something inherently good about that. But the big form that it takes is it's a gift. It's something that is supposed to be good. And like one of the things that Heschel says about the Shabbat, that the only thing that like gives me a little pause, he has this quote that says, it's a sin to be sad on Shabbat, which to me is like, in the way that I think maybe the audience is hearing that right now of like, oh, if you're sad on Shabbat, you're doing the wrong thing, with a more grounded understanding of how sin works and communal sin and all that. It's like, to me, it's kind of like saying like, that's a real tragedy. That's not what God wants. That's not what Shabbat should look like. But sometimes you get the bad news on Friday evening. Sometimes the thing happens right then. And, if human beings can be resurrected from the dead, then surely Shabbat can as well. And I think for me, that is one of the like breaking the rules by just saying like, you know what, give it another 24, 26 hours. Like, let's just throw it on again because we need to hear it again. And that is something where it's like, a lot of times we'll just be like, all right, we're not going to go to church. We're not going to do any of the things. We're going to, tell people like, hey, we can't do those plans anymore. Like there is something very important going on in Shabbat, and it's not fragile. That's why we can break Shabbat and come back in. Heschel talks a lot about that. It's something that is, happening in us, but also beyond us. Like we are showing up to a reality that is already going on, and that reality will exist regardless of whether we can see it, whether we experience it. And so that's where it's like, we aren't the same way that like, if we stop giving sacrifices, God's not going to go hungry, because that's not how it works. It's the same thing here. Like Shabbat isn't a fragile thing, but the atmosphere that connects us to Shabbat, that puts us inside of it, that can be fragile. And there's all these beautiful ways of maintaining it, but we're finite beings and sometimes it breaks. And however you respond to that, like let it be marked by grace, and again, like an underlining of the story that creation is good, that God wants you to rest, that you are here to love and be loved.
When I first read that Heschel quote about being sad on the Sabbath, the first thing that came to mind, always comes to mind, is this early Jesus community and this group of women that are honoring Shabbat on the night of the crucifixion, and they're hurrying. The one group is hurrying to get Jesus into the tomb. The other group is preparing on the back end as soon as they can to get back to the tomb. But this whole community is honoring Shabbat.
Yeah.
And I've always just been super moved by that, their commitment to that, in light of, like, if there was ever a day where I would have been like, you know what? And I would have said the wrong thing. I would have said, screw Shabbat. Like, it would have been horrible. What a horrible way to approach it. But they're trying to honor this thing that you're speaking to. And I think that's beautiful. And I think a wonderful segue into next episode's conversation, personally.
Absolutely.
I think of this idea of time stretching when I'm putting in my expense report, which we have particular deadlines for submitting our expense report. And I often take solace in the fact that I'm in Pacific time, but our director of administration is on Alaskan time. And I'll put it in a little bit after midnight and I'll be like, you know what? It's still the 7th in Alaska. My most recent expense report, I was even beyond that 1 a.m. time. And so I was like, well, how can I continue to stretch this idea? And I came upon this concept of anywhere on Earth, which is like this calendar designation that they use for deadlines. And it's like the deadline is whatever date at the end of day anywhere on earth. And it's like, as long as it is still that day in some time zone somewhere, you have met the deadline. And I think, you know, if we get too strict about it, it doesn't exactly work for Sabbath. But it's like, yeah, this idea of like, oh, it doesn't have to be this exact time in this exact way, because the reality is bigger than our time zones. The reality is bigger than us exactly where we are. And so, yeah, like I think it's more important to stretch that definition, because if we don't ever get to live in the benefit of Sabbath, it's like, well, that's nice that the reality is going on everywhere else, but it just doesn't work because I have to work on Saturday or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
We are stretching this because it is more important to be able to find a way to live in that Sabbath reality than to observe it in a very specific way.
I think what I'm hearing Brent say is that he has submitted expense reports from Sydney, Australia before.
No, that would be the wrong. I'd have to be way earlier.
That's the wrong way.
That's the wrong way.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Yeah. They're way ahead.
I'll tell you what though, looking at the time zone lines and the international date line and stuff in the Pacific Ocean is pretty bonkers when you get into the maps. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole after submitting my last one.
That's great.
Like, well, I easily qualify for Hawaii, but how much more can I stretch this if I really need to?
Oh, man.
Well, Brent, before you incriminate yourself anymore, you better get us out of here.
I will just say this about our administration team. They are incredibly gracious to me. And
that is true.
Apparently they enjoy my humorous remarks as I submit them on the knife's edge of deadlines. So
Nice.
It all works out. Anyway, yes, that does it for this episode. We've got one more. We've got a lot more stuff to talk about. We've got some ideas. We're gonna deepen Sabbath, which maybe I have totally misunderstood that. So we'll find out next episode. But thanks for joining us on the Maymon Podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.